When it gets down to having to use violence, then you are playing the system's game. The establishment will irritate you, pull your beard and flick your face to make you fight. Because once they've got you violent, they know how to handle you. The only thing they don't know how to handle is non-violence and humour. And that was said by John Lennon. Welcome to Surviving the Matrix, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Maxwell Egan. It's a pleasure to be with you once again, and I will be your host for the next hour. Now, in the world of 2012, in the political climate of 2012, the human race is facing a myriad of problems. But the really fortunate thing about it is that with this myriad of problems comes also a myriad of opportunities. And the opportunities we're being presented with are indeed the opportunities we have always needed to escape from the system that currently enslaves us. Because all of the problems that we see manifested by the system are having the effect of laying the workings of the system, the mechanism of the establishment, bare for all to see. And once we can see the corruption and the psychopathic nature of the society in which we live, we are then able to address the problem. Because the biggest problem that we've faced throughout history in regard to standing up against this system has been the hidden nature of the mechanisms that the system uses to enslave the human race. But now these mechanisms are being laid bare for all to see, and just being aware of the problem presents 3/4 of the solution to healing the problem. Because that's the big thing, folks, is knowing that a problem exists, knowing that the disease is there. Because if you're not aware of the sociological and psychopathic and sociopathic nature of the overall human mindset, or the mindset that controls our societies at any rate, then it's impossible to address the problem. It's the hidden nature of this mindset that has allowed the perpetuation of this system for so long. And that's why I see all of this as opportunity. Everything we face, folks, it's all opportunity. And the opportunities have never been more available to us, and they have never been more in your face than what they are now, especially here in Australia. Now, I know I've been concentrating on Australia a lot on the last few shows, but it's because things are just snowballing here, folks. It's absolutely outrageous. Some of the things that the tyrannical Gillard regime is doing to this country. And just by her actions, folks, there really should be no doubt in anybody's minds that Julia Gillard is an absolute psychopath and has done more to destroy this country than any other previous leader this country has had. And in fact, Julia Gillard has absolutely worked to remove people's rights, to impose her will over the people, and has also taken considerable steps to destroy what is left of the feminine within our society. Not only has she given herself pay rises to the extent where she is now the most highly paid leader in the world, but her latest escapade is to turn the Northern Territory of Australia into the world's nuclear waste dump. She's also solely responsible for putting women in the military on the front line with weapons so that they can now shoot other people. Women have traditionally played supportive roles in the military and were not put on the front line with weapons, but Julia Gillard wishes to see further equality of the sexes by putting women out on the front line with weapons and turning them into killers. Julia Gillard, of course, has absolute disdain for anything to do with the feminine in society and has very much tried to be a man all her life. Probably because she's such a failure at being a woman, but I guess that's just the way the mind of a psychopath works. She's also worked to destroy the water table in this country by promoting coal seam gas mining as much as she can, and to basically help with the theft of all of the resources of this country and see them transferred overseas. Something you've got to understand about Australia, folks, is that Australia is one of the most resource-rich countries on earth. It really is a very wealthy country in respect to the resources that we have here. And with all of this great wealth of resources, we also have one of the lowest populations anywhere in the world. So the share of the common wealth of this country per capita should be absolutely enormous. It really should. You should see Australians having one of the highest standards of living in the world, simply because of the amount of resources in the country and the low population that we have here. But you don't see this, folks. And what you do see in Australia is one of the highest costs of living in the Western world. And so this is a very clear indication of how little of the common wealth is actually passed down to the people. You see, countries like Dubai, simply because they have a lot of oil, it's a very rich country because the wealth of the nation is passed down to the people in the country. But in Australia, you don't have that. You have none of the wealth of the nation passed down to the people. Prices never go down and the standard of living never goes up. It just gets harder and harder and harder. The standard of living only goes up for the CEOs of big corporations and for the politicians. As I said, Julia Gillard is now the highest paid world leader. She actually pays herself $450,000 a year, folks. This is more than President Obama. So there really should be no doubt about the importance of the Australian leader on the global stage. And really all she does to gain this incredibly high wage is destroy the country around her and remove the rights and destroy the lifestyle of the people within her country and rape all the resources of the nation and send them overseas. That's all she does, folks. And for this, she pays herself almost $500,000 a year. And yet, for the average Australian, the cost of living is extremely high. And it just gets worse and worse, and more people get discarded by the system the further along we go because of the psychopathic nature of the system. I've got a friend who is actually in trouble paying off the payments to her house, and when the court was informing her that she was facing possible eviction, the judge and the police officer and all the appointees of the court were all saying to her, look, we really feel bad about this. We don't want to see you thrown out of your house. But unfortunately, we have no choice. And folks, this shows the nature of the system because these people do actually have a choice. What they need to be saying is, well, hang on a minute, we, the people, constructed this system in order to service the needs of humanity. And yet, the most expendable thing within the parameters of the system itself is humanity. So how then can this system be serving humanity? So rather than throwing this woman out of her house, what we need to do as police officers and as judges and lawyers and representatives of the legal system is we need to look at which sections of the system are flawed enough to have created this as a reality. What parts of the system are flawed enough that they would cause a person to be discarded in order to serve the system? So we need to follow the line of command, see which legislations have been enacted and which acts and statutes have been enacted which have led to this woman being thrown out of her house, and find out who enacted those statutes and acts and go and arrest them. Because we the people employ the politicians to maintain a system that serves humanity. So if people are the most expendable thing within the system, then the system is flawed. These regulations and rules must have been created by somebody, so let's find out who it was and hold them accountable for their actions. That's the way people need to think. That's the way the judges and the police officers and the lawyers need to think, because the system is supposed to service the needs of humanity. See, that's what we've lost, folks, is that perspective. The perspective that we are actually the top of the food chain. We created the system to serve us. So if we are the most expendable thing within the parameters of the system, then we need to find out what has degraded and deformed the system in order for it to behave this way. And again, we come back to the psychopathic nature of our society, and a quote that I used a couple of weeks ago from the book Political Ponerology that said that when you have psychopaths running countries and employed as the CEOs of big business, then their psychopathic morals, or lack of morals, becomes the morality of the system over which these people preside. and that this affects the human mind like a pathogen, and that what perpetuates this and allows the infection to continue is people's lack of knowledge of how it works. See, this pathogen, this psychopathic pathogen that controls the mindset of our society, can only exist if people are unaware that it exists, because as soon as people are made aware of it, it becomes quite obvious for all to see, and when it becomes obvious, then people can choose to step away from it and do something else. And not only that, to hold those who enacted these pieces of corrupt legislation accountable for their actions, because it's a paper-based system, folks. It only exists on paper. It's not like any of these laws or so-called laws that are enacted are actually real. They're only written down on paper as legislation. They are the will of people that they impose upon the rest of society. And they have their law keepers and police officers in order to enforce their will and their legislation. But all this legislation does is remove natural law from the planet and impose the will of politicians in its place. And this enables the politicians to be able to do stuff like strip mine the planet, strip mine our country, the way they're doing with Australia, the way they're destroying the water table and saying, oh, it's all within the parameters of the law, the way they're turning the Northern Territory into a nuclear waste dump. I mean, all of this stuff only happens because of people's lack of knowledge of the psychopathic nature of the system and their belief that the system is real, when it's not. It's just a paper-based reality that was made up by those people that we employ to protect us and to look after us and to make sure that society functions well. And so that's the understanding that people need to have, and this is how we change it, folks. We have to be aware of it, and we have to be aware that we are the top of the food chain. That's why we don't need violence, we don't need wars, we don't need anything like that. All we need to do is to realise that the system is fiction and that we are the top of the food chain. And you see, this is why it's got to be grassroots, folks, because the people that are going out there and enacting all of this ridiculous legislation and enforcing it upon the people and kicking people out of their houses and arresting people for breach of statute regulations and all this sort of stuff, they need to be asking themselves why they are doing it. And often it starts with the people as well. I mean, someone comes to evict you from your house, you say, well, why? Why are you doing this? What is this system that has been created which would allow you or force you to come and evict me from my house? Have you ever questioned the validity of the system and why such a system would exist? You know, because once people start to question why they are forced to behave in pathological ways and psychopathic ways and sociopathic ways, you know, they go and evict someone from their house and they go home feeling terrible about it, but feeling that they had to do it because it says on this piece of paper that I had to do it. Why don't they ever question why it says that on that piece of paper? And why don't they question the person who gave them the paper? See, this is the way it's got to be, folks. People simply have to start questioning their orders, start questioning the authority which chooses to insinuate itself upon others or force itself upon others. So when you have this perspective, folks, it comes down to a real grassroots action of everybody questioning why reality has to be this way and examining the nature of it. Because when you do, you come to the conclusion that what we have is virtually a psychopathic and sociopathic system that has been put in place. And it exists because this is the psychopathic and sociopathic mindset of the current rulers of our times. And they've been in charge, unfortunately, for an extremely long time. And that's why the earth has remained in the state that it's in. No matter how many efforts we undertake to prevent starvation, to prevent war, and to stop bloodshed, and to stop homelessness, and to support humanity and make it an empowered place for all, we still face a myriad of problems, and all of these problems exist at the hands of the system itself. And that's what we need to understand, folks. And we need to understand that the system is only propped up by us because we agree to go along with it, because we never question the rules and regulations that are given to us on these pieces of paper. We just believe that we have to follow them, because if we don't, there is this legion of enforcers that are going to come and make trouble for us. And sure, there is these legions of enforcers, and they do make trouble for us, But they're only able to do that because we live in a divided community. That's why I always come back to the fact that each individual out there needs to recognise the validity of the individuals around them and break down the barriers in their community so that we can all stand side by side and ask why the world has to be this way. Because when we've asked that question, then we realise the need to change the way reality is structured, and we see the way that we can do it.